Avatar, Katara, and the Pirate's Silver. The story starts out by establishing that it happened before Season 3 of the show. Toph bores me by pointlessly whining because the Fire Nation is always chasing them. She says it's fine that she and Katara are different, and it's just that she taught Aang bending in a day and not weeks, which eventually makes Katara insecure. The scene was supposed to set up her trying to prove she's tough, but I didn't need to see that to be able to understand such a thing because I already know she can be tough. Her friendship with Toph already justifies her wanting to be tough. Some soldiers fling giant fireballs at Appa, causing Aang to make him fly up. But he flies too up despite all of his experience with Appa, causing Katara to fall. And I have to assume that it makes sense because due to the direction the fireballs are going and where they are, if he did anything other than flying directly up, he would fly into the fireballs. And she creates a water spout to break her fall. She makes a ball of water around her to protect herself as she gets sent down a waterfall. She gets out of an ice ball. And eventually Aang warns Sokka not to yell because they're near some soldiers, who should have already heard the yelling. They see one of the soldiers eating alone, and it plays them for comedy when of course Toph could make anybody look like a chump. He starts a fire, and Toph traps him in the earth, which she should have done in the first place because that embarrassed him too. The heroes start putting out the fire, and Sokka says the fire's out before the fires are actually extinguished. The soldier accuses Aang of malice and reveals to him that he thinks he and the Air Nomads want to take over the world. It makes sense that people with no knowledge of them would believe that when already their own government wanted to do that. This panel was mentioned as a goof on the wiki because Aang doesn't learn for the first time that Fire Nationers think this until he went undercover as a student in their country. But it could still not contradict the show, because he didn't reveal that he was taught about this in school. Katara eventually gets told by a soldier that no one's allowed outside the village without an escort, because Ozai only does stuff out of sadism, and the sheer arrogance of being able to make any law he wants, which is the same thing as sadism. He plans to arrest her just because she's not from this village, so she knocks him out and drags him into the bushes. Thankfully, she covers herself with a hanging green blanket instead of stealing his clothes, which would be uncomfortable for her to see. Anyone who looked down would still see that at least some of her clothes are blue. The shopkeeper complains that the soldiers ate all of his food and he can't get new food because of the blockade, so that's a bit interesting. Someone tells her to follow him, and she wisely says no, but not so wisely lets down her hood, which makes it too obvious she's Water Tribe. She's surrounded by people who praise her on how good she was at waterbending. The guy with earrings in the 1800s wants to hire her for his ship, and she likes the idea because it'll go away from the soldiers. She's expected to demonstrate her waterbending just in case, even though he saw her waterbend. She didn't have to hit someone in the face with water. That could have gone wrong for her. Jiang explains that he tested her because earlier he hired someone else who pretended to be a waterbender for no reason. That doesn't explain it. When he saw her waterbend, Aang thinking he could talk reason into one of these people is lampshaded as being ridiculous. I see a padding subplot. He says that the Fire Lord spread lies that the Air Nomads had an army. So this can only make sense with the show if he was only surprised by learning that the schools were where the lies were spread, and before he thought only adults were told this. After some boring, worthless dialogue for way too long, Aang says he's going to tell him the truth, even though he clearly just did. He would have heard him say this because he's right next to him. He thinks airbending's evil and gets told that airbenders can't outright fly, even though that makes no sense. So I'm glad Zahir flew in The Legend of Korra, although the idea that he had to let go of his human attachments is completely convoluted anyways. He's still an airbender. Didn't Aang fly with airbending for his last battle with Ozai? Why would he need the Avatar state for that if he's only flying with airbending? The scene is such a waste of time. The soldier seems to believe him that he can't fly on his own at least. He's asked who told him the Air Nomads wanted to take over the world, And somehow, instead of him saying he learned it in school, he says he learned it from his cousin, as if he didn't go to school, which is the only way this couldn't be a continuity error, and says that other people learned this from a poster. So this completely contradicts the show. I guess the poster was meant for people who didn't go to school, but you'd think the Fire Nation would have truant officers. Katara thinks she has to be like Toph and spits, which ends up embarrassing her. I feel bad for her, but it's not as bad as it could be because she's been annoying before with no consequences. Katara ends up being brought to someone who happens to be the cousin of the pirate she stole a waterbending scroll from. How is she gonna get out of this tense situation? Well, she intimidates him just like the Avatar's friend once, denies it, and walks away. Jing says the Earth Kingdom army is stretched thin from fighting the Fire Nation, so they've been easy to steal from. I have to assume that it's only King Bumi who's having the Earth Kingdom fight the Fire Nation, despite his lip service to neutral Jing, because the other king was oblivious to their threat. Unless the Earth Kingdom army is fighting on their own, without any sort of interaction from either the king or Long Feng, the one who is actually in charge. Somehow Katara asks why these boxes are marked with the Earth Kingdom army seal, even though she should have heard people confess that they took it from their army a panel ago. She also somehow wonders why she'd be expected to wear their army uniform when it's easy to assume it's meant for a disguise so they could get out of here. Somehow Aang and his friends still aren't planning to take off, even though Katara could be hurt too badly to heal herself. I want to blame anyone for completely skipping this subplot. Sokka thinks he could talk someone out of their government propaganda that's fully emotion-based with facts, because he's an idiot in this story. He says that he doesn't really want to be enemies with the Fire Lord and would love to live in harmony with him and the Fire Nation. The soldier says the Fire Nation is sharing its wealth and achievements, but gets told that the Earth Kingdom citizens didn't welcome him into their homes, or let the armies into their biggest city. Sokka says that the rest of the world also wants to live in harmony with this country like it used to, but he doesn't believe him. He breaks out on his own. Why did this take so long? He shouldn't talk to them first. Somehow Appa eats him and spits him out when I expected Toph to earthbend him away first. Jang reveals that he was raised in a family of pirates, which is less likely than the alternative, so I don't take it seriously. He says his ship is the last one here that wasn't taken by the Fire Nation, and he's keeping his crew free from them. He says the Earth King's army aren't his people because the Earth Kingdom abandoned the people outside the walls of Ba Sing Se. If that was true, their army wouldn't be fighting a war with the Fire Nation at all. Some people get handed some papers to avoid suspicion. How did they get those papers? Oh, we don't need to explain that minor detail. But someone wants to take a closer look at that ship. He would hear Jian call Katara a waterbender. The guy wants to arrest them because they tried to take the ship earlier this year and they resisted. How inconvenient that he recognizes the ship, even though ships tend to look similar to one another, if not the same. I guess he's a real ship fanatic. The crew gets onto the ship and Katara waterbends them for a little while. She tells Jing they've got to get out of here without the cargo, which is very stupid because she should know she could easily fend them off while the crew gets the cargo because she's right next to the ocean. Why can't she just keep sending the entire ocean coast at them over and over? He should tell her that. I guess she knows this and just doesn't want them to get away with stolen cargo, but it'll never get returned to its owners anyways, so there's no point in her interfering. They should have told her what the cargo was. A soldier sneaks up on Jing and she saves him, and we see the impact both times the soldiers get hit. That's nice, but I prefer to see impact on people I actually hate. Well, these guys are just trying to stop pirates and doing their jobs, and as it's been established, they don't know that they're evil. Jing decides to set sail even though he could still tell Katara to send the ocean at them. Eventually the ship's hit with fire, and somehow Katara asks him why he cares about the cargo and accuses them of not caring about his crew for no reason. She easily waterbends to make the Fire Nation ship not a problem, and makes him move ahead, damaging a dock so the pirates would be able to move the cargo onto the ship she stole. This is the best part of the story, of course. She fortunately genuinely smiles when thanked and spoken to in a friendly manner. This is the nicest pirate I've ever seen. It's confusing to portray a pirate so sympathetically. Eventually, Katara freezes the soldier who talked to Sokka, and Jiang makes sure a Fire Nation ship gets sunk by stuff that got catapulted into it. So can the people on that ship swim? No one seems to consider that, thankfully. Katara notices medicine on the ship, and she accuses Jiang of planning to make sick people pay for medicine and calls him cruel. So we know what her opinion on American healthcare is. He should have lied to her that he's gonna have people pay an extremely small price for the medicine, since she wouldn't believe him if he said he was going to give it to people for free. He could also tell her that he's planning to keep the medicine in case he and his crew ever need it, which she could have easily assumed. Saying he's evil for that would be the same as calling a pharmacist evil for keeping medication in his store. She should know it wouldn't be sustainable for everyone to give out medicine for free unless the government or a billionaire-funded charity was paying for it all. Jiang gets humanized again because when the ship docks, someone goes up to him with flowers happy with him. He thanks them for it. I guess this is his little brother. He explains that when he said they'd be paid in silver, he meant silver lily. There's no reason he'd say silver instead of being clear, because he was just begging for her to betray them at the last second. He says he'd be evil to demand money people didn't have as payment for curing their sick, but he's only doing this because they're his people. She says he'd be a pirate if he did that. She shouldn't say that because for all she knows, that could tempt him to change his mind. Oh, of course someone must have hated this for being political, or more like disagreeing with their opinion, because if it was agreeing with someone, he wouldn't complain about it. Jiang says his crew swore an oath to fight the Fire Nation until the war's over. She smiles because of this, and Aang greets her on Appa. She hugs him and Sokka and Toph, who at least halfway hugs back. While it makes sense that Katara would tell her friends about what she's been doing, it's still boring. I'd rather just have a text box say, one explanation later, like Archie Sonic. Sokka doesn't believe her, thinking that she's mistaken about the fact that they're pirates. Aang doesn't believe her either, even though these people have plenty of crazy adventures, and she's not known for being an idiot or a liar. Toph not vouching for her makes sense because Sokka thinks she's mistaken. Her living lie detector sense can't detect when someone only thinks they're telling the truth but aren't. Thankfully, Jiang offers to make Katara an honorary member of his crew for getting them down the river. Wouldn't it suck if the story ended before this point? He says it might be time for him to retire. He doesn't seem old, so why does he think he's getting too old for this? I guess he phrased it poorly, and it really means that one day his luck might run out. Sokka calls her the coolest sister ever, and the story ends with her agreeing. This issue by Faith Aaron Hicks is about Katara falling off Appa because Aang had to steer him directly up to avoid fireballs, and joining pirates and keeping some soldiers off their backs because she thinks that's the only way to get away from an occupied town. But she should have known that if she waited long enough, she'd see Appa in the air eventually. She could then drop her disguise. But I get her being impatient to get back with them faster. And I like that the story had the pirates do something nice because it's led by a nice guy. Because the whole story had her hating them and had me waiting for the pirates to become total monsters. So it's a nice surprise that it didn't do that. This is the right kind of idealism that IDW Sonic should have instead of having nothing but irredeemable villains. This is more gray and gray morality. The kind it does have is shown off by Aang, who should know he can't change the mind of a Fire Nation soldier. But at least Toph thinks that's stupid and the person they're looking for can heal herself, so they have a reason to think there's no hurry. I was interested in seeing what Aang's subplot would be like, considering that I didn't think he'd have one, but it was nothing but frustrating padding. Speaking of that, that's what Suki Alone is. A depressing, pointless story where she gets her hopes up in prison just to have everything she did be for nothing. At least for her, because it did get someone special privileges for telling the guards about her garden. I don't want to review that story because that's all I have to say about it. And it's probably mostly boring dialogue anyways. I like the idea of a garden that grows food in prison, but I hate the story because the prisoners end up losing access to it, when the people running the prison should just be grateful for the saved money and food. Another pointless story is the duel in the Spirit Temple, because it ends on the status quo. But it sounds interesting enough to review anyways because Azula's in it. And since when did she ever go to a spirit temple?